welcome or welcome back to Party Trick Astrology. I'm Nina.
I'm Shaina.
And this is your Lilith in the 11th house. Whoop-de-doo, woohoo! This is Lilith in the 11th house. It is like what, our 23rd video in the series. So there's lots of stuff to check out. We've been doing Lilith through the signs and Lilith through the houses. We are really truly in the home stretch now, so you got a lot to catch up on if you want to. Speaking of catching up, we've got so many links in the description. Just like do yourself a favor and check all of that out. We have separate channels, we have Instagram, Shaina has TikTok, I've got a newsletter if you want to sign up.
Just so you know, for this Lilith series, if you don't know what Lilith is or what it represents in the chart, we have a whole video up about that. And also we are using the Black Moon Lilith, which is the true Lilith or the mean Lilith.
They're just different ways of calculating the same thing.
I will say first and foremost, the thing that kind of slapped me in the face when I was looking up 11th house celebrities, these are mega stars. Some of the most influential people ever. I mean, obviously not everybody with a Lilith in the 11th house is automatically gonna be super mega famous, but I think that this placement is definitely a big indicator of that kind of influence being a huge possibility.
Yeah, I think that has to do with the fact that the 11th house is all about networks of people. It follows, is succeedent to the 10th house, which is all about your career and really has to do with the groups of people that you become a part of, that you associate with as a result of the status that you acquire in this world. And when you have a Lilith in that kind of social house, and Lilith has to do with power, with that autonomy, with that demanding of respect and attention, it would make sense that with that kind of energy taking place in the area of your life that has to do with your cohorts, with your networks that supports your public persona and your career, it would make sense that you really dominate that space with a lot of influence and notoriety. These people really will do whatever it takes to work their way up the social ladder, the social hierarchy. And we even mentioned last video, Lilith and Aquarius, about how much this Aquarius and 11th house energy has to do with sort of branding yourself, has to do with the sort of cliques that you belong in. We equated it to the tables in Mean Girls. And so to have Lilith influencing this house of yours, naturally you're gonna be sitting at a very powerful table.
With every Lilith placement, it always kind of gets kicked off with a feeling of exile from that house or that sign. You experience that exile throughout your life, but that's kind of what kicks it off. And with Lilith in the 11th house, in a lot of ways, I feel like the exile is exile. A lot more just literally and plainly and simply than a lot of the other placements and houses. You feel exiled from your peers, from fitting into society. It really always can feel like it's you against the masses. Sometimes you can even be exiled because you're ahead of the times. And I mean, I think that makes sense that a lot of celebrities have this placement and they have this feeling of exile because they're so ahead of the times, because so many celebrities and people that reach such a big status are trailblazers. That's why their status is able to hold up for so long, is because they're doing these things first before anybody's seen them, before the world has grandly accepted them. And that's kind of that big it factor sometimes.
Yes, along with the exile of Lilith comes the subsequential thirst and craving of embodying and overpowering whatever you were exiled from according to your Lilith experience. And so to me, the Lilith in the 11th house really feels like, why fit in when you were born to stand out? When you're exiled from being welcomed into a group, from being accepted with open arms for who you are, and just feeling like you fit into a niche, you suddenly have this overwhelming desire to prove that not only can you fit in, not only can you belong, but you can also be the spearheader of a certain group. You can have, again, influence over people. You can be the leader of the group, and so you can stand out in that way. And I think that there's so many just like high school film tropes that this fits. It's like a Mean Girls moment. It's if anyone watched the Bratz movie, that's a big theme there. Almost like She's All That sort of has that element as well. It really is that sort of feeling of transitioning into this coming of age space of like, who am I really if I don't fit in? And the answer that Lilith in the 11th house comes up with is, I am that bitch. I am gonna be that Regina George character. I'm gonna be that person who is on top as sort of like a vengeance, a revenge for being overlooked and not welcomed.
We mentioned in Lilith in the 4th house that you feel like the black sheep of the family, but with Lilith in the 11th house, you feel like the black sheep of the world. You feel like the black sheep of the masses. Like it's on a huge scale that you really feel like this outcasted person. Lilith can be a superpower in a lot of ways, but at first you will definitely feel a shame from not fitting in, and you can become a strong loner before you kind of blossom and become like almost like the figurehead of a group. But with becoming a strong loner, you can also, similar to Lilith in Aquarius, crave nothing more but fitting into a community. And I think that this is why a lot of times Lilith in the 11th house people kind of create their own community, in the sense of like, I'm going to use her as an example. Lady Gaga has a Lilith in the 11th house, and she's the figurehead of the monsters. I think that's what you're called when you're a Lady Gaga superfan. Lady Gaga is the figurehead of it, of course, and especially it's the figurehead of Outkast. But with being a figurehead, it's like you're also not really involved with them. You don't really know your fans. They're your fans. You know, you're not interacting with them on a daily basis. And so you become this figurehead, but also, as Lilith does, there still is, I think, a little bit of a feeling of exile from a community, because you do kind of stand alone in this, and then there's like thousands of fans, but you're up alone on stage.
Yeah, and also just Lilith inherently is selfish, and Lilith, especially in the 11th house, will jump over or walk over anybody's backs to get to the position that they want to be at. I mean, Lady Gaga has some interesting conspiracy theories surrounding her, like that she killed the real mastermind behind Lady Gaga and like threw her off a bridge or something, which is alluded to in Paparazzi. Just very much conspiratorial and crazy, but those are the things that are out there, and very much like sold her soul to the devil, because like, how did she come out with her debut album being called The Fame? And it's like, immediately she was famous. It's a crazy thing. And also just, she is a magnetic sort of character where it's like, who is she? She's crazy. She's hard to tap into, hard to understand. And that's another thing, is why fit in when you were born to stand out? You sort of wear that alienated badge like a badge of honor, and I'm gonna do things that are crazy, that are weird, and that's going to be the new cutting edge sort of thing, because now I'm in control in the situation, and I did everything and anything to get here.
And also, I mean, she has very provocative performances, and she's been exiled for some of the fashion choices that she's made, too ahead of the trends and just making, you know, the meat dress, and, you know, that's very Lilith, very selfish.
And just for the sake of being weird, just for the sake of playing into this brand.
Yeah, very much so. Speaking of clothes, let's talk about what I'm wearing, because it's about me, because it's Lilith, it's selfish. I'm just kidding. I obviously went with the fake pinned piece of printed paper that says Chanel on it, because I was like, okay, I need a brand. I need, you know, some influential brand, and I don't own anything like that. So I was like, you know what's even more Lilith in the 11th house than wearing a Chanel shirt is wearing a fake Chanel shirt. And I've known of a Lilith in the 11th house that was like, I love fake Chanel. I love fake Louis Vuitton. Like, that's a status symbol. That's a culture all of its own.
His name is not coming to me right now, but this man, Dapper Dan, who really made sort of fake, gauche, over-the-top designer branding the thing of streetwear. You know, and you see that a lot with new money in the influencer world, people just wearing like Gucci everything, Louis Vuitton, like print all over the place. And that was a result for the Black community not being like allowed in so many words to sort of purchase real designer clothing and that sort of look. And so it was sort of like a mockery of that, and also creating an accessibility for communities that were not seen as allowed to inhabit that space. And then interestingly, his designs took off and are now just truly what actual designer brands are mimicking and making the norm for streetwear. And it's just really interesting. I don't know if he has Lilith in the 11th house, maybe I'll look it up. But there's definitely this theme of, I wasn't welcomed here, I was exiled from this community, so I'm gonna take it into my own hands and make it my own thing. And then suddenly that becomes the mainstream. That becomes what's the most influential. So that's very Lilith in the 11th house, and specifically to do with branding and brands, which is also just very 11th house in general.
Yeah, and making a mockery of it, especially. Very poignantly Lilith. Friend groups, as we've mentioned, are a huge thing with the 11th house, and with Lilith in the 11th house, your friends that run in a more taboo or sexual underbelly of things, where there's always drama around your friend group, always gossip around your friend group. You might find that your friends are jealous of you, or you're jealous of your friends, and, you know, they stab you in the back, you stab them in the back, and there can be a real distrust after a lot of these situations of getting close to people, of connecting truly with people, and of not being super secretive because you're used to sharing information with a group of people about yourself and them turning it against you. Also, sometimes you can, as the Lilith in the 11th house person, act preemptively, and because you're so used to friend groups and people in them turning against you, you may try to turn against them first as a way to protect yourself. So there's just a lot of messy shit that goes on within the Lilith in the 11th house friend group.
Definitely. I mean, having the 11th house be a social house, your Lilith shows up in these social relationships. And because Lilith is truly the embodiment of using or destroying whoever you have to in order to fulfill your own selfish needs, it can very much be that the people that you choose to surround yourself with are not people that you choose to surround yourself for the sake of trust or for the sake of community, but rather for the sake of somehow boosting yourself up. Or maybe you have this belief or this idea that friendships are, you know, created for the sake of getting ahead in life, or adding to your brand, adding to your image. And because that is what was communicated to you, and that certainly seems to be very communicated to people who grow up already in influence or who are part of influential spheres, that can create a lot of distrust, that can create a lot of isolation, furthering that feeling of exile, to where when you are involved in groups of people, there isn't actually that heart-centered rapport, and there's only that sense of, I enjoy you, or I keep you around because you are an extension of myself, and you can provide something for me very selfishly. Now, that being said, Lilith is not the most prominent thing in anybody's chart. And in my experience, definitely, Lilith can seem more like an appendage or a little voice, a little gremlin on your shoulder, rather than something that's like sitting in the driver's seat of your life. And so it can just feel like a nagging paranoia sometimes that someone is out to get you, or that they don't truly understand you. In fact, maybe you have had the experience where other people treat you as someone who is an extension of them. People invite you into their circles because of what you can do for them or how you make them appear. And then that cause creates the effect of you becoming very distrustful and perhaps behaving the same way in your relationships with the people that you invite into your circle. And sometimes it's not even conscious, and it's not even something that's totally in your control. Like, you can think of Lady Gaga. She obviously has a huge group of supporters, a huge amount of people in her network, and they are all serving her. That's what happens with Lilith in the 11th house, if it's you being more conscious and manipulative in that way, or just because you stumble into a situation where your group dynamics happen to look like that. And again, it's worth noting, you can be on either end of that. You can be involved with people who are Lilith-like, or you can act Lilith-like when in groups of people.
Yes, this is definitely a placement that can denote a big possibility of being very badly bullied. Because we mentioned, you're very different, you're an outcast, you feel exiled, so bullying a lot of times comes with that. And sometimes with bullying, you can get a very tainted view on humanity. And I mean, the 11th house is humanity as a whole. You can just feel like you are so badly treated, which you very, very well possibly could have been, that you can then just, like I said, have a sour look on the world and on people and on society as, society. There can be a real kind of joy of social destruction. We mentioned with Lilith in the 10th house, like, oh, there is a real need to be seen. With the 11th house, it's more of a real push and desire and lust to have influence on the world.
Yeah, exactly, which is stemming from that exile, from that thing where you don't even belong in the masses. So you want to overcompensate that feeling of lack to the point that not only do you belong in the masses follow you. Another thing, I'm trying to find the lighting in which it doesn't look like I'm on the surface of the sun. Lilith is incredibly sexual. Lilith is provocative, perverted. So in the 11th house, there can be real problems with boundaries as far as what relationships in networks and groups you get sexually involved with. There can be even a difficulty of seeing anyone as platonic. And I think that this also derives from a sense of wanting to be accepted and wanting to feel like you have attention and influence from people, that you end up having this craving to seduce people, to get their attention in that way with your sexuality in any kind of social space that you're in. It's like in the 6th house, maybe your Lilith in the 6th house is like anyone that you're working with. No boundaries there, you want to seduce them. But in the 11th house, it's even more. It's people in your friend group, it's people that you work with, it's people, maybe, I wonder if there's any themes of this with celebrities with Lilith in the 11th house, wanting to seduce their fans, not having that boundary with their fans. Just Yeah, you're nodding and smiling like there's some real data there.
Yeah. With networking, like these people are master networkers. Like you mentioned, like being friends with somebody only because it's like, what can I get from you? Kind of Lilith-like exchange. And a lot of times the popularity gains can come from sex or underhanded shady means, something really extreme. Also, the 11th house has a lot to do with the internet and online communities, because you have the potential to kind of be bullied in real life and have trouble finding your way in that way. You can really be like an internet recluse. And I was thinking that like an example would be like those toxic like pro-Anna Tumblr communities, or even like I got kind of like incel vibes, maybe even from this possibly. Just something along those lines where it's just more toxic, obsessive even communities that you can easily just get sucked into. Because you're just trying to find like-minded people, but Lilith always kind of goes a darker route.
Definitely, Lilith can be very dogmatic, very black and white, very extreme, and so can the 11th house in some ways. It is ruled by a fixed sign and the radical rebel. And the 11th house has to do with sort of social ideals, the communities that you find yourself in, because they have the same ideas for how the world should work. Now, typically the 11th house and the humanitarianism that is associated with it has to do with social justice and equality, but Lilith, you know, puts a darker spin on things, can make it tainted and perverted. So definitely the social ideals that you can find yourself having with Lilith in the 11th house can be a very self-serving social ideals that have less to do with what you think will make the world a better place and more to do with what will make the world a better place for you, how the world and the humanity around you can serve you, such as the incel community. Oh, if girls were just more traditional and not such whores, then they would sleep with me, that sort of thing. It can be radical but narrow-minded in its radical nature, you know what I mean? Just because Lilith is like, I'm right, you're wrong. And you can definitely find yourself in communities in which that mindset is encouraged. And now it's worth noting, again, this is where the fact that Lilith can be a little gremlin on your shoulder, a little voice in your head really pops up, because especially when you look at the differences between the mean Lilith and the true Lilith, there's one version of your black moon Lilith, that the mean Lilith, that you feel more aware of and more in control of and maybe act more out of. And then there's the true Lilith that can sometimes just feel more erratic and like you have less of a grasp on. So anorexia and any eating disorder is really a situation in which your mind is working against you and it's dysfunctional and you aren't purposefully acting out of this. It sort of like has a mind of its own. It's a voice in your head that has ideals of its own for your body. So again, it can be a situation in which you have actively decided to follow these social ideals, or you have a little voice in your head that's pushing you to think a certain way, no matter how destructive it is to your overall health and well-being.
Yes, and similar to Lilith and Aquarius, Lilith in the 11th house can definitely be a contrarian just for the sake of being a contrarian, and can kind of do that back and forth thing of craving to be able to fit in, but then also the second that you do fit in feeling gross, like, oh, these people suck, I'm gonna exile myself again, and then be like, oh, I'm so lonely, and then, you know, no one likes me, but then almost kind of scratching that itch of almost wanting no one to like you, or wanting people to disagree with you, or wanting to be on the fringes of something just to be on the fringes of something.
It can come from the fact that with Lilith in the 11th house, you might have had a number of experiences that lead you to believe that humanity is corrupt, that humanity is not worth saving, that sort of like nihilistic view, even to the point that, you know, to be accepted by maybe social norms or just like accepted largely outside of a fringe community would be an indication that you are corrupt, that you are part of this detrimental man or detrimental norm, detrimental society that you find to be cancerous because of your experiences, being rejected and being exiled and being just mistreated by your communities.
You know, I keep saying like the 11th house is one of notoriety. A lot of times people with, you know, healthy 11th house stuff or a lot of 11th house placement come from a notable family, and a lot of people with Lilith in the 11th house came from a very wealthy, very notorious family.
Paris Hilton and Kim Kardashian, just to name a few.
And that's also really interesting because when you think of the word privileged, that's something that's really isolating, that puts you in a lot of power, but that can make you feel unrelatable, unwelcome in the larger masses. And yeah, that can be very alienating. So it's sort of one of those things where on the one hand, you're experiencing this exile from a lot of the normal groups of people and pigeonholing yourself into this one category of people. And on the other hand, in that category of people, you get the most influence.
So celebrities, like I said, these are some big ones. There's a lot of big people that obviously I didn't even include. The 3 most influential rappers have Lilith the 11th house: Kanye West, Drake, and Jay-Z. Whether you like it or not, you have to agree, these are huge people, revolutionaries in the music industry, very controversial people as well. I mean, let's take Kanye West. It makes sense that he has this Lilith in the 11th house. He is also kind of uncancelable. No matter what he does, no matter what he says, no matter what shitty new album he comes out with, that's just my opinion, no matter how little work he puts into it, he will get fame, he will get notoriety because he has kind of cemented his position in this. And I mean, he's not just a musician, he's an influencer in the biggest terms. He does fashion, he does music, he knows people, he has connections. You know what I mean?
He ran for president.
Oh yes, of course he would. Also, something that I thought was interesting about Drake, he has that weird thing with like Millie Bobby Brown. You were mentioning at the beginning, like doing nefarious things with fans. Drake just, you know, I mean, maybe it's just all his Scorpio energy, but weird vibes, don't trust it, you know. Another person with an 11th house Lilith is Miley Cyrus. Another person who's gotten a lot of controversy because, you know, she went through that big thing. She was like, guys, I may look like a Taurus rising, but I'm actually a Scorpio moon and I'm sexy and I'm a Lilith in 11th house and I'm gonna rebel against the, you know, thing that you pigeonholed me into. Also, you know, she came from a famous family.
One quote that I think is really funny that I read from Miley Cyrus is just on her whole transition from Hannah Montana type of Miley to the Miley Cyrus that we know today is, as soon as I had sex, I was like, I can't put that fucking wig on anymore. I can't do it. That awakening, that sexual awakening made her realize that her brand is this sexual provocative Lilith. When she got caught on camera smoking salvia and all of this stuff, that was a big deal back in like 2008 or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, her Can't Be Tamed music video, how Lilith in the 11th house.
There's a lot of like, you can't make me do this. I can't be tamed. We can't stop. No boundaries here. And also, I think this is just like really relevant for anyone who grows up in fame, is that the people that you surround yourself and work with are going to be the ones that you get romantically involved with. Like, I think everyone that she's ever been with, at least that is like notable enough for me to know about, she was working with, on a movie with, did an episode of Hannah Montana with Nick Jonas. Her first kiss was Tyler Posey from when they were acting as little kids in like some sitcom or something. So everything from her first kiss was a lack of boundaries between work and relationships.
Also, another person who has this is Missy Elliott, another hugely famous, influential rapper as well, and a trailblazer. She's a female, and even the fact that she was a little bit bigger was a huge thing in the early 2000s when the Paris Hilton culture was so prevalent. I mean, she literally created and pioneered the 2000s like rap sound. I mean, it's even coming back now, and you know, anytime we hear those kind of influences in music, we think of Missy Elliott.
It's a great example of someone who is exiled. Like, even nowadays, it's difficult for a female rapper to make it, and anyone who does becomes like the female rapper of the time. And if there's ever two, they are mortal enemies, right? So it's not a community that females are welcomed in. So Lilith in the 11th house can really show that it goes one way or the other. You're either completely pushed out and exiled, or with enough fervor and vigor, you can get to the very, very top.
There's just so many fucking famous ass people, like Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen. Also very, you know, Paris Hilton 2000s, skinny ass bitch kind of vibe, you know? They had a huge influence from a young age. They literally grew up in fame.
It's also extremely disturbing how sexualized Mary-Kate and Ashley have been, and especially were, before they came of age. Countdowns to when they turned 18. If you've ever seen the like Bob Saget roast, my goodness, it is in such poor taste.
The other day, after all these years, I'd never met the Olsen twins. He introduced me to them. I said to him, how do I tell them apart? He says, Ashley swallows.
Again, it's something that they didn't even have control over.
Somebody else who has Lilith in the 11th house is Jerry Springer of the Jerry Springer Show. And I was like, this makes sense because his show was like all about almost like fetishizing the underbellies of the way that we as humans socialize. Like, look at these people. Oh, look at these people. Like, let's expose these people. Make these people seem crazy. Like, it was very, very exploitative.
Yes, making your money, making your fame off of the suffering of other normal, everyday people. I think that to run a show like that, you do have to like have the opinion that society is somewhat doomed or cancerous or just gross. You have to have a low opinion of people to be able to feel comfortable exploiting them for years and years and years. I believe that the Jerry Springer Show is still going on, and it's more than just people getting mad. It's just like the weirdest kinds of people, like the craziest kinds of situations that you can think about. And it also goes to show Lilith is want to make success off of the backs of other people, more vulnerable people.
Nicolas Cage has this position, and I mean, he dominated the movie industry for a long ass time. And so randomly, everybody turned against him and was like, yeah, remember when we loved you in every movie? Nah, bro, you suck. We now hate you in every movie, and now you're a giant meme. It hasn't affected his fame at all. If not, it probably made him more famous. But he's a meme now.
You're supported by the communities, and then you're exiled by the communities. But then you're sort of supported more in this new internet type of community, and you get a lot of support and notoriety there, which is very 11th house. Because, I mean, depending on how you look at support, publicity is publicity, baby.
Right. Come on, this is so any publicity is good publicity. For Lilith in the 11th house, it's very true. Ray Liotta and James Gandolfini have Lilith in the 11th house. They both played prolific mobsters. Ray Liotta was in Goodfellas, and James Gandolfini plays Tony Soprano in The Sopranos. These are both huge, prolific roles, and they're gangsters. They're Lilith-like roles, you know? And they're hugely famous because of it.
Yes, anything mobster is, first of all, very Pluto or Scorpio, but also there's this element of killing whoever you need to for the sake of preserving the self or preserving your own self-interest. And especially in the 11th house, you know, the mob is a community. The mob is, like a network, and just being ruthless and selfish within that network, despite the fact of feeling like we're a family.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Ray Liotta has this in Scorpio, and James Gandolfini is a Scorpio rising. So these influences definitely help that typecast. Stevie Nicks is known as being like the witch in a pretty lovingly way. I feel like people look up to her because of that.
Stevie Nicks too, and Fleetwood Mac is just an incestuous sort of band. Talk about blurred lines between work and personal and getting involved with the people that you're working with and in a community with. Just listen to Rumors. Just listen to the whole album Rumors. Rumors, I mean, there you go. That's very Lilith in the 11th house.
Somebody named Mystic Meg has this, which I didn't know who she was, and I was like, who is this? I want to look her up. And she is an astrologer columnist for the British Sun, and she's one of the most famous astrologers in the world, and she writes horoscopes. And, you know, Lilith is very occult, very astrology, but, you know, I'm sure you agree with my disagreements, Nina, of the sun sign horoscope, which kind of feels Lilith in the 11th house like, well, this is what's going to gain me notoriety. If I actually did horoscopes based on the rising sign, which would make more sense, like, people don't know what the fuck that is. That's not going to make me famous. I need to adhere to the public, you know?
Well, and here's the thing. Let me tell you a thing or two about being an astrologer. It is one fast way to get exiled from any respectable kind of community, especially when you're working in journalism. You choose the astrology section to write about. That is one fast way to be exiled in the workplace.
Somebody that I guess I'll mention is Marilyn Manson. There are allegations of a lot of sexual abuse and misconduct. The very harsh side of Lilith in the 11th house, I think, with his fans, which isn't that kind of what you were talking about earlier. And I mean, originally he was somebody who was like, hey, I'm here for all the outcasts, I'm here for all the people that are different, you know, and all the weirdos really flocked to him and resonated with him, and he obviously very much exploited that and used that to his advantage.
He's not there for the people who don't fit in, as is evident by his actions against his fans. He's there so that the people who don't fit in can give him the sense of belonging, can give him the sense of power.
Of course, there's going to be a dictator with this placement. Benito Mussolini has this, and I guess he actually started as, I think sometimes a lot of times they do, he started as a revolutionary socialist, and then he turned into a fascist dictator.
So it goes. So it tends to go. And not only do we have a fascist dictator with Lilith in the 11th house on this list, we have one of the most influential fascist dictators. I know you know who Benito Mussolini is.
Exactly. Like, he's not just another dictator. He's one of the dictators, you know.
I'm not like other fascist dictators.
Literally. You know, again, another person who has huge influence over the weirdos and the outcasts and those who like spooky things is Tim Burton. He has influenced every Pisces out there, and he has Pisces ruling his 11th house with his Lilith and Aries in the 11th house. But what's interesting is that, I think we've talked about this before, Nina, like, he's got this Lilith in the 11th house. Sometimes this can be a poser kind of thing. He doesn't have any Pisces energy. He doesn't have any Scorpio energy. He doesn't have any Cancer energy. It always feels a little bit disingenuous to me.
Because it's the brand.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, and that is the opposite. The 11th house is the opposite of the 5th house. The 5th house is creating something that is coming from a heart-centered place, that is coming from that Leo energy of this is who I am and this is what I want to create. The 11th house is less heart-centered and more mind-focused and more like, okay, I'm gonna fit into this brand. And that's what Tim Burton did, because all of his Pisces, Scorpio, weirdo stuff is not demonstrated in any other place in his chart. He's like, let me be the weirdo, let me do the weirdo kinds of movies. And another example of someone who mixes business and pleasure, puts their sexual life in their creative life. I think he's not married to her anymore, but Helena Bonham Carter was his wife, or maybe still is, in every single one of his movies, along with Johnny Depp. And just, again, like putting your friends in your work environment, putting your lovers, I mean, I don't think it's confirmed that Johnny Depp was a lover of his, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't a little menage a trois that went down between those three at one point and just putting that all in there.
I didn't know that they were married, but that makes sense because I'm always like, she's in every one of his movies. This is weird. Like, obviously something's going on, you know? I'll try to end on a little bit more of a positive note. Well, at least I guess I think so. And everybody really likes her. Frida Kahlo, she is an extremely influential artist who explored a lot of more taboo topics, a lot of more revolutionary topics like, you know, gender and class and race. There's so many, you know, biopics done about her, and people, you know, dress up as her all the time. Like, yeah, other people have unibrows, but she is the unibrow, you know what I mean? She really influenced generations. It's in Gemini, so she really understands kind of like what's going on, and very in the know, by being not in the know, by being so radically different, you know?
And it is incredibly, Lilith in the 11th house, incredibly rebellious of her to make so many self-portraits of a person who is not the typical model of beauty. And despite not being the typical model of beauty, having that confidence to make herself her own brand, her uniqueness. She was crippled, she had a unibrow. All of this stuff is very different to what you would think the ideal poser for pictures and paintings would be. She also mixed business with pleasure. She was in a very notorious relationship, influenced each other's brands as well on each other's work. And I think also something that's so just like intriguing about her is her taboo sexuality and her ownership of that, despite being very far from the typical image of beauty.
Yes, and sometimes in a really good light, Lilith can be very empowering.
Yeah, I think that what can make Lilith in the 11th house empowering, especially to the individual, is that you can reclaim what it means to be powerful, because there's inherently that part of Lilith in the 11th house in which you are made to feel less than, you are made to feel like you don't belong. And it's truly a lot of hard work and dedication and selfishness or self-love, depending on how you look at it or depending on how it manifests in a particular person, that gets them to ultimate success and notoriety.
That is our Lilith in the 11th house video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you have a Lilith in the 11th house, I hope it resonated or maybe validated some experiences. We'd love to hear your personal experiences in the comments.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking it out here on the newly renamed Lilith podcast.
Oh yeah! Welcome to the Lilith podcast. I forgot to say. Little rebrand for a Lilith in the 11th house.
Next up is Lilith in Pisces. Can you believe it? So unpredictable that we would go that way. Who would have thought?
Bye to the masses, to the online communities, to the sleuths. Sleuths! How Lilith in the 11th house? I didn't mention that. Anyways. Bye.
Bye.